Hello students, welcome back to this particular course on visual semantics for visual communication. Today we will talk about human cooperative communication. In the last class, if you remember, we talked about human communication as such, various aspects, the types of human communication, how human communication happens, and the different aspects associated with human communication. Today we are going to pinpoint on a particular area or a particular speciality rather of human communication, which is human cooperative communication, the notion of cooperation coming into picture, and we will discuss more on that because the whole communication paradigm relies on cooperative communication to a great extent. So let's look at the slide where we finished in last lecture. So we talked about the types of human communication in the last lecture. We talked about intrapersonal communication, where it is within self, interpersonal communication, where it is between two individuals, intra-group, where the communication is happening within a group, intergroup, different groups communicating with each other, organizational communication, and organization housing all of these different entities, and then you have cross-cultural communication, which cuts across all of this again. Then you have cross-community communication, where there are different communities participating, and then you have gestural communication. So today we will take a clue from this gestural communication and see how the gestural communication alone holds such a big aspect to human communication, and we will see accordingly various aspects to it. Every time in the class I tell this story to my students, that once me and my friend were walking down the corridor, and in my college days, and I suddenly noticed a bicycle just next to the library, and I immediately pointed to that bicycle. My friend, I caught attention of my friend also looked at that bicycle, and then something happened. The premise of that story is, why would I suddenly point to a bicycle which I just saw, and by pointing I was trying to communicate something to my friend. Now if we look at the next slide, the bicycle experience, I have shown that bicycle and I did one pointing, but in the background, in just that simple notion of pointing the bicycle, and my friend was really happy that I pointed to that bicycle, but what was happening to that? So I will now slowly reveal the story to make you understand. So with pointing to that bicycle, there is a context. The whole bicycle story is happening in a context. Say we are walking down the corridor, the cycle is next to the library or next to the playground, wherever. So it has got a context around it. We are in a campus, we are walking down, I am with my friend, and then I saw a bicycle. So that creates a context for me to point. Not only that, so these are mostly this physical context. So I have some physical context around me, and then I have some situational context. So the situational context around me also creates a sense of communication. Why, while suddenly walking down the library, I pointed this thing to my friend. So for that, the next level which is coming into picture is the experience that I have with that bicycle, or the experience or the past experience that is related to that bicycle. So now I will reveal the next episode of that story. This bicycle was actually stolen 2 days back, and my friend was really worried, and he was trying to search the bicycle all over, and there was a lot of distress, and different kind of things happened because of losing the bicycle. So now comes the experiential aspect which is lying behind with that bicycle. So I know from my past experience that this kind of a bicycle was stolen, or my friend was searching for this bicycle, or I know this bicycle, the color of the bicycle or the brand of the bicycle is very similar to that of my friend. So now you can set the whole notion of pointing into a perspective. First, what I did is I have related it to a context, that this bicycle is appearing here. Of course, I might not be showing that bicycle or pointing that bicycle had the context been very different. Say I probably would not point that same bicycle in the same manner had I seen that bicycle 10 years down the line. So one is the context, the space time, physical and situational context, and the other is the experiential context that I have with it, is that I know what is the past story with it. I have experienced that, I have perceived that, I have seen that with my own senses. I know what has happened, the cognitive level. So there is an experiential aspect associated with the communication. But the third aspect, which I am going to show here right now, is the most important one for human communication, or human cooperative communication rather, which is that I have a particular assumption in mind, which probably very few of the animals do when it comes to communication. That's what is a major differentiator, which differentiates us with various other species of animals, and we have progressed, or we have moved on with civilization with a enormous speed in terms of communication and in terms of information processing. So this notion of assumption is very own to human communication, and the assumption here is inherently cooperative in nature. So that's the whole domain why we are talking about human cooperation, and that's the reason why I told you this story. So the assumption here is that my friend will be relieved as soon as he sees the cycle, or some action could be taken, or there could be a verification being done that if it's his bicycle or not. So at the core, I was trying to help my friend, I was trying to find out a solution. So the assumption is based on that, and that because of that the entire notion of communication took place. And look at how the communication happened. The communication happened just by one pointing. I just pointed, I did not even tell anything, but in the background these three aspects were working together. One is the context, I have a context in hand, I have the experiential aspects which are there, and I have the assumptions within me which is trying to establish some kind of cooperative motive. So that's the very clear picture why human beings communicate, and communicate in a cooperative fashion. Now if we move on with the slides, now we see three distinct buckets. Okay, we have a context bucket, we have an experience bucket, and we have an assumption bucket. And the context bucket actually sets you the base for the entire communication to take place. So basically the context bucket holds the need for communication. First of all, why am I communicating, or what is the purpose of communication, what is the importance of that communication, that sets the base for that. So I should be in context, only then there is an urge for communication. Otherwise that communication many a times doesn't happen, or even if it happens, the communication has a chance to fail. If you remember the first slide, there was an arrow indicating from one entity to another. So there is a chance that there will be a break in this information communication because the context is different. For that matter, maybe the culture is different. So the culture is a meta context, it is creating a meta context within which this creates the need for communication, or the importance of communication, and aspects like this. So one facet is that, and then we have the importance, and then we have the logic of communication. So all of this comes under the context bucket. Now if we move on to the experience bucket, experience deals with cognition, understanding, analysis, and validation. That means what? Experience is associated with our perception. So as soon as we perceive something, we process it in our mind, we learn about it, and that's the process of cognition. Next time we recognize it. So that's why the word is used as a recognition, and cognition is the process by which you ensure recognition to take place. So first of all, you analyze that, you imbibe that, you understand the stimuli or the information that is reaching you, you process it in a certain manner, and then you cognize it, and the next time you may want to recognize that same processed information. So when we talk about experiencing, we are referring to our past experiences, or we are referring to some event which has happened. Basically, we have perceived all that through our senses, we have cognized that, we have learnt about that, and the next time we will try to do a validation against that, that okay, if this has really happened, or if this is matching, if this is something true or false, if this relates to me or not. So after the context barrier, it moves on to the experiential barrier, where we kind of filter it through our own understanding, through our own cognitive paradigm, and then the next level of communication occurs, or the need for communication, or the basis of communication occurs, which is the assumption. So the assumption part deals with something very core to human value or virtue, you may say. So assumption deals with altruism, or the emotions, or the responses, or the values. So human beings have grown up with this very strong notion of responsive behavior, or the behavioral domain, where we judge situations by our emotions. So it is not always by pure rational logic which works in place. Of course, that is very, very important in terms of decision making, or in terms of information processing or communication. But apart from that, there is another aspect which relates to the values, altruism, the responses that we are assuming we would get. To give you an example, again going back to this bicycle story, why I am trying to point this bicycle to my friend, and what is the assumption? He would be happy, probably he would be delighted, he would get some kind of help from me. So based on these, the assumption domain is working. So if we again look at this three buckets, from context we move on to experiences, and from experiences we move on to various assumptions. We then can rely on various assumptions that we can do based on this context and experiences, and these three together actually creates the need for communication. So these three, you can say, are the pillars which are setting up the need for communication. So these are setting up the need for communication. So one is the context in which the entire set is happening. So the context is more holistic. Then you have the experience, which is more individualistic. So this happens within the self to a great extent. And then is the assumption, and the assumption is based on mostly the culture. So the cultural entity, or the group, or the community, those kind of entity comes into picture when it comes to assumption. So these three things together forms the need for communication, or the need for cooperative communication, and which is happening in most of the communicational aspects all the time. So moving on with this particular lecture, so there are various hypotheses which are associated with human cooperative communication. Various degrees of theory have been associated, and why the human cooperative communication takes place, and what are the different steps through which it happens. So the first step to the communication, or the first hypothesis, is the cooperative communication. I have more or less explained the concept of cooperative communication to a great detail, where we talked about the triangle, where we are trying to set up a context, we are trying to set up an assumption, and that whole thing is based on some kind of experiences with that person or with that group or with that organization or within that culture. So entire thing relies on some kind of cooperative need or some kind of cooperative aspect of communication. So that's the very first hypothesis which you have got, that human cooperative communication relies on cooperative mode, and any communication henceforth that is being designed or that is being thought of has to be in line in terms of cooperative communication. Only then it has got a higher chance of survival, its effectiveness will increase, and the communication will happen in an efficient manner. So this is the first thumb rule that you should always keep in mind. The cooperative communication of human beings has to be taken into picture. For example, to give you a very broad example, say I ask you to design a poster for your college fest or for a program in the college. You have to design a poster or a banner. You are definitely trying to communicate something through this poster now in whatever media possible. So here basically if you look at the details of the poster, it has to be cooperative in nature. Whoever is looking at the poster, you are trying to cooperate with that person, you are trying to help that person to understand what this program is all about, where is the venue, what is the date. Visually looking at it, you get a clear understanding of what this program is all about rather than creating a confusion. So if you see at the detail, at the core of it, the cooperative model is playing in, and that is very important. That is the aspect we are trying to focus on this particular lecture. The second one is the shared intentionality. Now this is a very primitive form of communication which has happened for other species of animals as well. There is always a shared intentionality. So if the intentions are not common and the intentions are not shared, or there is no unanimous agreement to the intentions, the communication might go haywire. Say, to give you again the example of the poster, if that poster is not conveying the intentions of different groups associated, it will fail at some point of time. So for the poster there is an audience, so that is a different group, and for the poster there is the people who are producing the poster, maybe the organizers or maybe the event hosts. So they have different perspective which is being focused in that poster, the intention is different and which is being given out, whereas the audience is there to receive that information. The intentions are matching with each other. So I am giving you something and the intention is matching with the receiver, so the receiver is receiving the information. So there is a shared intentionality which is working in that communication. So in that case the communication would be fruitful, the communication would be effective and working. In other case it has a chance of failure. So this is a very primitive form of animal communication for that matter, where if you look at other animals, they actually have a shared intention when it comes to communication. Say for example hunting, for example, so they communicate with each other for the shared intention for hunting something. So it's a survival game, maybe hunting or searching for a prey or alerting someone from a danger. So these kind of aspects happen in terms of shared intentionality. Then the next aspect or next hypothesis which is crucial in terms of human cooperative communication is socio-cognitive skills. Socio-cognitive skill is nothing but where it deals with observing others or observing other social interactions and then coming up with a skill set for your own. So for that matter, from our childhood we all grow with particular communication modes, with particular behavior and approach by our socio-cognitive skills, by our socio-cognitive actions, observations. We tend to pick up others, what others are doing, how they are interacting with each other. From that we receive these signals, we process it, and that becomes a skill set for human beings, and then we use that at different point of time. The next aspect is the pro-social motivation, which I have again described to a great extent when I was talking about the assumptions. So, the pro-social motivations are the norms for helping others without expectation. So, human civilization or virtue of human civilization teaches us very inherently that the society runs on helping, selfless or many a times in return for some other help. So, that is the way the whole society is working, and this is the pro-social motivation which works with all of us, and that is also part of the human communication which is happening, which is needless to say, because if human society drives on pro-social motives, human communication is part of a human society, and that also relies on pro-social motives. And last but not the least is the cultural learning and or the imitation. So, there are various communicative conventions and constructions. So, culture is based on certain convention, and those conventions are constructed, and being a part of that culture, we are constantly imitating the culture, or through our socio-cognitive aspects we are observing that and we are following that to some extent, and hence we are following a cultural notion, or we are following a cultural trait, or we are part of a particular culture. So, this is how the various hypotheses are playing one after the another, many a times all of them together or one by one. So, these are the various building blocks for human communication, and if you look at this particular slide, these building blocks many a times work in the opposite manner. So, when it comes to human cooperative communication, it works on the other way around, where we learn our communication mode by being in a culture and imitating. We first try to imitate our parents, our family members, our friends, our teachers, and many other groups of people with whom we interact. So, we tend to interact and do these imitations. Then we move up to the pro-social motivations, which are the values or the norms for helping others, which we learn in schools, colleges, family, society. Then it moves to socio-cognitive skills. We tend to observe others, how that is happening. Then there are shared intentionality. We try to learn this shared intentionality. We many a times develop shared intentionality, and then we move on to the cooperative communication. So, it moves from top down approach. One by one we develop these building blocks, and finally we move on to a place where we are trying to communicate with each other. So, this is the domain of human cooperative communication, various hypotheses involved with it, and how we are slowly from a very gestural, imitative, observation kind of mode of communication, cognitive paradigm, we slowly move on to something where we are trying to communicate something. So, this is how the whole building block is taking place, and this is happening all the time. Now, moving on to the next slide, which talks about three motives of human cooperative communication, and there are three very distinct motives of human cooperative communication. The first motive is requesting, the second motive is informing, and the third motive is sharing. So, there are three very important motives of human communication when we talk about. One is requesting, the second is informing, and the third is sharing. So, the requesting mode is again a very primitive mode of animal communication, for that matter, where you want something. Okay, when the other entity or the other animal wants something, it will try to react, or it will show certain kind of behavior or traits which is communicative in nature. So, there is a sense of requesting for that, and if that request is not fulfilled, you take some other action. For animals, they might fight with each other, they might go for a benevolence kind of thing, they might go for tricks or something like that. So, this is the way where first motive comes into picture. You are requesting for something, you want something, or I want something, and for that I am trying to communicate in a particular fashion. That is the first motive by which we try to communicate. Coming to the second motive, which is the information motive, or we are trying to inform certain things to another entity, another individual or group or community or organization. So here we are trying the other entity to know something because of a particular reason. So try to understand the difference between requesting and informing. Requesting is where you want something, and for that matter you are giving out the signals, or you are trying to communicate to the other entity what you want. Whereas in terms of informing motive, you are trying the other person to know something because of so and so reason that might not be relevant to requesting. So informing others brings in the aspect of assumption, which I again am emphasizing. Assumptions are very, very core to human aspects. So we are trying to develop this notion. So over course of time there has been development from requesting to informing, where you are informing for some particular need. And coming to the third one, which is more advanced or more developed to some extent, is the sharing notion. So where you are trying to communicate something from the point of view of you want the other to feel something. So you can see, which is very different from this, where I want you to do something to help me, which is the requesting mode. I want you to know something because of something, which is again very, very analytical, logical mode of information communication. Whereas if we look at sharing, here I want you to feel something so that we can share. So you can understand that this is very, very crucial part of human communication. When it comes to human communication, there is a sense of sharing, there is a sense of cooperation, there is a sense of coexistence, and hence the whole communication aspect has developed or exuberated, it bloomed into a different domain because of this particular aspect of human civilization. If you remember, in the very first lecture we talked about the rhetorical aspect of communication and the relational aspect of communication. So this is the domain where the relational aspect of communication is taking its importance and becoming dominant, and that creates the premise for human cooperative communication. So if we now move on to this particular diagram, where we are talking about how this cooperative communication is happening, or rather the model of human cooperative communication, we will look at the communicator per se, the receiver per se, and the domain, how the entire cooperative communication takes place. This is very, very relevant for us to understand, because if we are trying to talk about visual communication and visual semantics related to visual communication, we need to understand first how human cooperative communication takes place between the producer or the communicator and the receiver. So there are two entities and they are communicating with each other irrespective of the media. We are not talking whether the media is visual or auditory right now. This is a generic model which works for cooperative communication, and we will look at how this communication takes place with each other in our next lecture. Thank you for your patient listening.